Snow hauled through the high passes of the Montana mountains like a wounded beast, swirling in ghostly spirals that devoured sound and sense alike. The world was white and endless, cruel in its beauty, and into that wilderness came a small wagon creaking under the weight of hope and desperation. Inside, wrapped in a shawl far too thin for the biting cold, sat a young woman who had never seen a mountain before. Her hands trembled not only from frost but from the memory of every mile that had led her here, 1,000 dreams stitched to a letter promising marriage, warmth, and a name she could call her own. She had crossed rivers and prairies, leaving behind everything she had ever known. And now, as the wagon rolled to a halt at the edge of a clearing, she saw two figures standing in the snow. The driver gave her a look, part pity, part warning, before flicking the reins and muttering, "This is where your journey ends, miss." She stepped down, her boots sinking deep, the cold biting through to bone. The men before her were not what she had imagined. No fine coats or soft words. These were mountain men, broad-shouldered, wind-burned, with eyes that had seen storms that could tear a soul apart. One held an axe, its blade catching the pale sun. The other leaned against a post, watching her with a look she couldn't read. "You'll satisfy us both," the taller one said, his voice deep, steady as the mountain itself. For a heartbeat, she froze, the words cutting through the wind like steel. Then he added, "By proving you've got the courage for this place. Out here, a woman's strength is what keeps a home alive." His words held no cruelty, only a test, one she didn't yet understand. The second man stepped forward, brushing snow from his coat. "Name's Elias," he said. "That's Boone. The letter you got, it was from both of us. We built this place together. Lost everything together. We figured one of us ought to have a wife, but the truth is, out here, one pair of hands ain't enough to fight the cold." Her heart pounded as she looked between them. "You mean, you both sent for me?" Her voice cracked like thin ice. Boone nodded once. "We ain't civilized folk. But we're honest. You'll have food, a roof, and men who'll work sun to moon to keep you alive. But you'll need to work too." His gaze softened just a little. "Can you handle that, miss?" She swallowed hard, glancing back at the empty trail that vanished into the blizzard. There was no going back, the driver was already a shadow on the horizon. She turned again to face them, feeling her fingers numb, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I didn't come all this way to give up now." Boone's stern face broke into something close to approval. "Then you'll do fine," he said, taking her satchel from her. "Welcome to Iron Hollow." They led her to a cabin half buried in snow, smoke curling from its chimney. Inside, the fire roared bright, filling the room with warmth that felt like mercy. She stood near the hearth, thawing slowly, as the two men shed their heavy coats. The cabin was simple but solid, every beam hand-cut, every plank holding stories of survival. Elias handed her a cup of steaming broth. "You look half-frozen," he said softly. "Drink. We don't got much sugar or salt, but it'll keep you alive tonight." She sipped, the warmth spreading through her chest, her fear easing just enough to let her breathe again. "Why me?" she finally asked. "There must have been other letters, other women." Boone shrugged. "Maybe. But you wrote plain and true. Said you didn't want riches, just a place to belong. That's worth more than gold out here." Silence hung between them for a moment, filled only by the crackle of fire and the faint moan of wind outside. Then Elias spoke again, his tone gentle. "You'll see, miss. Life up here ain't easy. The mountain takes what it wants, sometimes your crops, sometimes your peace. But if you give it your heart, it gives you something back. Strength. Purpose. Maybe even family." She looked into his eyes, tired, kind, and weathered by too many winters. For the first time since leaving home, she felt a flicker of safety. That night, as the storm raged beyond the cabin walls, she lay awake on a cot near the fire, listening to the creak of the timbers, the low murmur of the men's voices. They spoke of timber to cut, of bears that prowled too close, of the long winter still ahead. They didn't whisper about her, nor did they treat her like something fragile. Instead, they spoke as if she were already part of their world, a strange comfort in a strange land. When dawn broke, the world outside was buried in white. Boone was already up, splitting wood with strokes that echoed through the trees. Elias brought in armfuls of kindling, nodding at her with a quiet smile. "You can start by warming your hands," he said, handing her a pair of rough mittens. "After that, we'll show you the spring, if it ain't frozen solid yet." She smiled faintly, still shivering but determined. Each small act felt like a step toward something new, something earned. Over the next days, she learned to carry water, to mend a fence, to light a fire that wouldn't die in the wind. Her fingers blistered, her muscles ached, but she never complained. Boone watched her closely, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with the quiet respect a man gives another fighter. One evening, after she'd managed to keep a fire burning through a blizzard alone, Boone handed her a mug of coffee and said, "You'll do more than survive here. You'll make this place stronger." That was the closest thing to praise she'd ever heard. Elias smiled from across the table. "Told you, Boone. She's got the fire." She looked between them, realizing she'd become the spark they hadn't known they needed. They had built a fortress against loneliness, but she had brought something even rarer, warmth. And though the mountains still growled beyond the window, the cabin now felt alive. As the weeks turned to months, the snow began to melt. The streams roared again, and the pine air filled with promise. One evening, she stood outside, watching the sun sink behind the peaks, painting the world gold. Boone came to stand beside her. "You still think we're mad for writing that letter?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "Maybe a little. But I think it was meant to find me." He nodded, glancing at the valley below. "We needed someone who could believe in a place like this." "And I needed a place that believed in me," she replied. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peace. In the distance, Elias called from the cabin, "Fire's up. Supper's waiting." She turned to go, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As she stepped through the doorway, the warmth hit her once again, wrapping around her like home. And in that moment, she knew she had crossed not just miles of land but miles of fear. She wasn't the shivering girl who had stepped off the wagon. She was something else now, forged by frost, fire, and faith. The mountains had tested her, but she had satisfied them both, not through submission, but through strength. Spring slowly touched Iron Hollow, melting the last snow and waking the valley from its long sleep. The young bride who once shivered in fear now stood strong beneath the rising sun, her hands rough from work, her eyes steady as the river. She no longer looked like the lost girl who had arrived from the east, she was part of this land now. Boone and Elias watched her split wood and carry buckets from the spring, both silent with respect. The mountains had accepted her, and so had they. One morning, dark clouds gathered over the peaks. Boone looked toward the ridge. "Storm's coming fast," he said. "We need the traps before the snow buries them." Elias nodded, but before they could stop her, she spoke up. "Let me come. I can help." Boone hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Stay close. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes." They climbed through icy wind, gathering traps and supplies, but the storm struck sooner than expected. Snow blinded their path, and thunder cracked through the valley. Suddenly, a roar echoed, an avalanche tearing down the slope. Boone shouted, "Run!" She stumbled, but Boone grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a fallen log as the white fury swept past. When the snow settled, the world was silent. Elias called from nearby, his voice muffled. They dug toward him until his hand broke through the snow, alive but shaking. Together they limped down the mountain, half frozen but still standing. Back at the cabin, she built the fire while Boone winced from a cut on his leg. Without fear, she tore her scarf and bound the wound. Boone stared at her, his eyes soft. "You saved us," he said. She smiled faintly. "We saved each other." Elias looked on from the hearth, nodding. "The mountain's seen your heart now. You're one of us." Days passed. Boone's leg healed, Elias mended the traps, and she worked beside them, chopping wood, cooking meals, patching clothes. Each small act drew them closer, not through words, but through shared silence and trust. When the sun rose over the valley again, Iron Hollow no longer felt cold. It felt alive. As the months turned warm, she stood on the porch watching the river flash in the light. Boone joined her, arms crossed. "You still wish you'd stayed in the east?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. I think this is where I was meant to be." Elias stepped outside with a grin. "Told you, Boone, she's tougher than both of us." Boone smiled slightly. Ain't that the truth? The three of them worked through summer side by side. They rebuilt fences, planted crops, and sang to keep time. Every sunset painted the mountains gold, and every night the fire burned bright with laughter instead of fear. She had come as a stranger, but now she was the heart of Iron Hollow, the reason two broken men began to dream again. When autumn came, Boone handed her a small gift, a coat he'd stitched from fur and hide. "You'll need this when the cold returns," he said. "The mountain's not done testing us yet." She smiled, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Then I'm ready." As the first snow began to fall again, she looked out at the land that had once terrified her. The peaks no longer seemed cruel, they felt like guardians, ancient and strong. Boone stood at her side, Elias by the fire, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear. The mountains had tested her, but she had proved herself. She had satisfied their demand for strength, courage, and heart. Her voice was calm as she whispered, "I came here a frightened girl. But now I'm more than that. I'm part of this place, and it's part of me." Boone nodded quietly. "The mountain's proud of you. So are we." The wind howled through the trees, but it no longer sounded angry. It sounded like a song of survival and belonging. She turned to face the fire, smiling. "Home," she whispered. So, dear listener, if this story touched your heart, remember, every storm you face is a test. Stand firm, keep believing, and one day, you'll find your own Iron Hollow too. If you believe in courage, love, and stories of survival, hit that subscribe button now, and join the journey.